Do we live under a limited or an unlimited government? To you, this question probably sounds naive because the answer is obvious. But in 1792, Thomas Jefferson saw this as the moment of truth. Alexander Hamilton had just laid out his blueprint for the General Welfare Clause, where he said the power is indefinite. To Jefferson and his allies, this was a total scam, a complete and profound betrayal of the Constitution that was approved. So on this episode, we'll dive into this essential and forgotten debate that set the stage for the largest government in history. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome. And thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for August 29th, Friday, 2025. So let's kick it off. It's December 5th, 1791, and Alexander Hamilton published his now famous report on the subject of manufactures. One of his big goals in this report was to push such an expansive view of the General Welfare Clause to authorize, well, pretty much unlimited power. And here's how he put it. The power to raise money is plenary and indefinite, and the objects to which it may be appropriated are no less comprehensive, also indefinite. He said, then the payment of the public debts and the providing for the common defense and general welfare. Now, Hamilton did acknowledge some limits on this power. There were three main exceptions. And taxes, first of all, must be uniform across the Union. 2, direct taxes must be apportioned by census. And then 3, no export taxes from any state. Other than that, well, this is what you get. He said, the phrase is as comprehensive as any that could have been used. In other words, this is the broadest term possible, so they have the most power you can even imagine, is how Hamilton put it. He said, because it was not fit that the constitutional authority of the Union to appropriate its revenues should have been restricted within narrower limits than the general welfare, and because this necessarily embraces a vast variety of particulars which are susceptible neither of specification nor definition. And that, of course, takes us to the text of the Constitution. This is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution, the so-called General Welfare Clause. And it reads like this. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Now, in order to get the full context of what this was all about, how it was understood, we've got to do a quick side quest back to the summer of 1775, a full year before the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin had just introduced to the Continental Congress, or submitted a proposal for an Articles of Confederation. Now, it didn't get a vote, but he did hand it out to various delegates. I think he was just kind of shopping it around to get some feedback. Thomas Jefferson is someone who got his hands on a copy of this, and we still have a surviving copy with his notes in the margin. And for this story, this is the really important one, because on the last page of his copy, Jefferson wrote this significant comment. Question: what their mutual and general welfare means. What does that mean, he asked, because that was text that Franklin used for his proposed Articles of Confederation. Jefferson concluded this: there should be no vague terms in an instrument of this kind. Its objects should be precisely and determinately fixed. So for Jefferson, at least in 1775, the phrase mutual and general welfare was vague. It wasn't fixed, and vague terms in an important document telling government what it's authorized to do, well, it's going to be used just how the British Empire used vague limits on their power. Even though they were unwritten, they were still seen as vague. Now, the final text of the actual Articles of Confederation included the phrase general welfare twice, most prominently here in Article 8. All charges of war and all other expenses that shall be incurred for the common defense or general welfare and allowed by the United States in Congress assembled shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states. Now, Hamilton's take about virtually unlimited power for this general welfare clause, years later, James Madison called that kind of a view a crock. He wrote, "With respect to the words general welfare, I have always regarded them as qualified by the detail of powers connected with them. To take them in a literal and unlimited sense, just so to say that their power is indefinite in any way," he said, "would be a metamorphosis of the Constitution into a character which there is a host of proofs was not contemplated by its creators." And considering that, let's go back to the Federalist Papers, authored by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. Madison made this same kind of case in Federalist number 41, right in the height of the ratification debates. This unlimited power view was really an argument of the desperate and the absurd. He said, he's responding, of course, to anti-federalist warnings about this clause. He said, "It has been urged and echoed that the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, impose, and excises, etc., amounts to an unlimited commission to exercise every power which may be alleged to be necessary for the common defense and general welfare." That's the argument that Hamilton made in December of 1791. Here it is during the ratification debates, and Madison is telling the people who thought that that might play out that way, "No way, you're wrong. That's not what we did with the Constitution. So this is why you should ratify it, because that's nonsense." He said, "No stronger proof could be given of the distress under which these writers labor for objections than their stooping to such a misconstruction." Now, Madison also explained in Federalist 41 that by putting a bunch of powers right after the General Welfare Clause, again, this is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. There's a bunch of other things that go right after. That meant that the clause was actually limited and explained by the powers that followed. In fact, he went so far as to say it's not even more than one sentence. It's not even separated by a period. Even the punctuation explains it. He said, "But what color can the objection have when a specification of the objects alluded to by these general terms immediately follows and is not even separated by a longer pause than a semicolon?" He's like, this is all connected. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a semicolon there. This is a very important legal document, and they weren't messing around. He said, "For what purpose could the enumeration of particular powers be inserted if these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general power? Because if their power is indefinite in any way, what was the point of listing anything else? All you needed was just the General Welfare Clause, and the rest of the Constitution was almost pointless." He said, "Nothing is more natural nor common than first to use a general phrase and then to explain and qualify it by a recital of particulars." Now that brings us back to Alexander Hamilton in late 1791. He was proposing this broad view of the General Welfare Clause as justification for federal bounties. Bounties was the term that they used basically to describe what we call federal subsidies of today. Hamilton wanted to use imposts or tariffs, a tax on one thing, to collect it, take it into the treasury, and then pay it out to particular industries to promote their growth. So it was going to be a cash handout, kind of a, corporate welfare. And he wanted to focus on industries like coal, wool, glass, cotton, and some others. Here's how he put it. "The true way to conciliate these two interests is to lay a duty on foreign manufacturers of the material, the growth of which is desired to be encouraged, and to apply the produce of that duty, the loot taken in, by way of bounty, that's the subsidy, either upon the production of the material itself, or upon its manufacture at home, or upon both. Now, Hamilton was well aware that no one was going to really be, well, there wasn't going to be huge support for this kind of a view of the general welfare clause. He knew that there was no power expressly enumerated in the Constitution for government to give cash handouts to really anybody. So he created this new constitutional foundation for it in the general welfare clause. Congress gets to decide how much power Congress gets to wield. He said, it is therefore of necessity left to the discretion of the national legislature. He always has to add national. Doesn't even say Congress or just legislature or the legislative branch. It is therefore of necessity left to the discretion of the national legislature to pronounce upon the objects which concern the general welfare, and for which under that description an appropriation of money is requisite and proper. So the agent of the people of the several states gets to determine how much power the agent got from the people of the several states. And the people of the several states, well, you already gave them that power, so it's up to them. It's their total discretion to determine what they're going to do. Now, just over a month later, this is in a letter to Edmund Pendleton, January of 1792, Madison fired back and hard. If you accept the Hamiltonian view, the entire point of a constitution with delegated powers is absolutely toast. It's finished. He said, if Congress can do whatever in their discretion can be done by money and will promote the general welfare, the government is no longer a limited one possessing enumerated powers, but an indefinite one subject to particular exceptions. That was the argument that Hamilton was making. It was an unlimited power other than those three little exceptions, and that's it. And here again, Madison directly connected the general welfare clause under the Constitution with the general welfare clause under the Articles of Confederation. He said, it is to be remarked that the phrase out of which this doctrine is elaborated is copied from the old Articles of Confederation, where it was always understood as nothing more than a general caption to the specified powers, and it is a fact that it was preferred in the new instrument for that very reason as less liable than any other to misconstruction. So he's saying, we had experience over a number of years of having this clause in the Articles of Confederation. And even though we can say, and he wasn't addressing this, even though we know Jefferson thought it was vague, in practice, the way it played out, it wasn't used as unlimited power. And so there was concern, Madison has basically explained, there was concern that if you used different terminology, well, it would be much easier for them to twist it. So we have this history and tradition on our side. Let's just include the same kind of text in the new Constitution. In just a moment, I'll share with you Thomas Jefferson's view, plus James Madison discussing this twisted version from Hamilton of the General Welfare Clause in a debate in the House of Representatives. And at the end of the show, really interesting warnings about power from the anti-federalist writer Brutus. But first of all, I should mention that while I realize I'm going through a lot of really important and somewhat detailed historical information pretty quickly, it's my hope that this episode, like every episode, serves as a bit of a highlight reel for you and encourages you to go out there and research more on your own time, because I'm just scratching the surface. And if you're that type of person who wants to learn more, you are in luck, because the TAC's got you covered. Every single episode, we publish a blog post for that episode on our website over at 10thAmendmentCenter.com/path-to-liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thAmendmentCenter.com/path-to-liberty. Alan Mosley does an awesome job getting that blog post organized. He sets aside a little bit of time. He's available to get that handled quickly and very accurately. And in the blog post, he sets up a show links section where he includes all the stuff that if my notes are well done, he includes all the reference links that I'm mentioning in the show, generally in the order that I go through them. So Alan will get that organized. I'll get it published a couple of hours after the show is done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. That way, if you want to read and learn more in context on your own time, you're all set. But anyways, let's get back to this, because in late January, early February 1792, President Washington kind of quietly asked for some opinions on the Alexander Hamilton take in his report on manufactures. And Thomas Jefferson got in on this pretty quickly. Secretary of State, he came down hard on it. It was totally unconstitutional. Now, he prepared some notes, and he wasn't expected to meet with the president for some time, but these are his notes that he had drafted in early February. He said, bounties, these subsidies, have in some instances been a successful instrument for the introduction of new and useful manufacturers. So students of history, there are people who could make arguments that these got some new and useful manufacturers off the ground. But there's a caveat. He said, but the use of them has been found almost inseparable from abuse. Now, he didn't go into detail here. They were all students of history. And I think he recognized, like so many others, that if you give power to government to hand out cash that's taken in as taxes from people, they're going to pick winners and losers. And people with power, with the ability to pick winners and losers with other people's money, well, that's going to be pretty abusive pretty fast. So Jefferson's acknowledging, he's not even talking about the debate on whether or not you should do this on various industries. He focuses entirely on the Constitution. And because of this potential for abuse, he points out that the Constitution didn't authorize it. That wouldn't be a land of the free, would it? I know they didn't use that term there, but he said the power of dispensing them, these subsidies, has not been delegated by the Constitution to the general government. It remains with the state governments, whose local information renders them competent judges of the particular arts and manufactures for which circumstances have matured them. Now, again, Jefferson didn't meet with President Washington for a little bit. I'll go over his notes from that. But in the meantime, in Congress, there was a real first test case of how this early Congress considered the constitutionality and the policy decision about bounties, about subsidies. And a bill came up that was intended to encourage cod fisheries. I'm not going to go into the details about this. There was some back and forth for quite a bit on it. But if you basically want to do some research and learn about it, you're going to want to look up bounty payments for cod fisheries. You'll probably find James Madison's speech on it, but learn a little bit more as well. Because in practice, opponents of the legislation said it would operate like a federal bounty. It wasn't necessarily going to be a cash payment, but even something that seemed more like it was running very close to it. Madison came down hard on it as well. He ripped into it on the House floor and went like this. If Congress can apply money indefinitely to the general welfare and, like Hamilton put it, are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may establish teachers in every state, county, and parish, and pay them out of the public treasury. But wait, there's even more. He continued. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may assume the provision for the poor. They may undertake the regulation of all roads, other than post roads. Post roads didn't count as all roads, as a quick aside. That should be an episode one of these days. But he's kind of describing what so many people consider the norm today. He's thinking of all the crazy things. What are these wild things that might happen if the federal government has the power to do whatever they want and determine if what means general welfare? Well, they're going to have schools. They're going to create their own schools. They're going to take care of the poor. They're going to create all these welfare programs. They're going to regulate every single road, and they're going to make people pay for it with taxes. So the result, he predicted federal funding and with it, federal power over pretty much anything and everything. He said, in short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. For every object I have mentioned would admit the application of money and might be called, if Congress pleased, provisions for the general welfare. Now, it wasn't just Jefferson, and it wasn't just James Madison. Here's another opponent, William Branch Giles. He also rejected these subsidies as totally unconstitutional. He said, this is on February 3rd, 1792 in the House, "For in no part of the Constitution could he, in express terms, find a power given to Congress to grant bounties on occupation." So if you work in a particular industry, there's nothing delegated there. He said the power is neither directly granted nor by any reasonable construction that he could give annexed to any other specified in the Constitution. Now, this guy was a well-known anti-federalist, so it was probably pretty easy for opponents of him to just be like, oh, yeah, that anti-federalist crank. Of course he's going to say that. But not this dude. Hugh Williamson in North Carolina was not only a framer in the Philadelphia Convention, he's helped draft the Constitution, but he was also a really, really strong Federalist supporter during the ratification debates. And so his opposition to the legislation just kind of hits different. Here's how Williamson put it. Establish the doctrine of bounties, set aside that part of the Constitution which requires equal taxes and demands similar distributions. Destroy this barrier, and what are you going to get? He said. And it is not a few fishermen that will enter claiming $10,000 or $12,000, but all manner of persons, people of every trade and occupation, may enter in at the breach until they have eaten up the bread of our children. They're going to totally eat out our substance if we allow the federal government the power to do this type of payment, this type of subsidy, these bounties. Now, Thomas Jefferson finally got his chance to meet with President Washington. It was right at the end of February. I'm not sure of the exact date, maybe February 28th-ish. Maybe it was the 29th. I'm not sure. But he wrote some notes on this on March 1st, 1792. And he really saw this as the moment of truth. And this is how he put it. They had now brought forward a proposition. This is what he described to George Washington. They had now brought forward a proposition far beyond everyone ever yet advanced. So this view that he's describing, that he's warning the president about, goes way beyond anything they had tried before. This was really bad. He said, and to which the eyes of many were turned, as the decision which was to let us know whether we live under a limited or an unlimited government. So if we accept this view from Hamilton of the General Welfare Clause, we live under an unlimited government, period. That's the system they fought a long, bloody war to secede from when it came to the British. So they're replacing the British system with one with a written constitution that does the same thing as the British system. Or can we have a limited system under a constitution? In Jefferson's view, Hamilton's general welfare reading wasn't really about using taxes to collect money, tariffs to subsidize various industries. It was really a scam, a way to twist the meaning of the General Welfare Clause, of setting the foundation for Congress to tax and spend on anything and everything that they want whenever they want. And he continued in his notes about that meeting with President Washington. He asked me to what proposition I alluded. I answered to that in the report on manufactures, which, under the color of giving bounties for the encouragement of particular manufacturers, meant to establish the doctrine that the power given by the Constitution to collect taxes, to provide for the general welfare of the United States, permitted Congress to take everything under their management which they should deem for the public welfare and which is susceptible of the application of money. Now, unfortunately for all of us today, in the long run, it didn't happen immediately, but in the long run, this debate was won by Alexander Hamilton hands down, because what Hamilton really pushed for is pretty much exactly how it plays out in practice today, if not even worse. Thomas Jefferson absolutely nailed it in 1775 when he said general welfare was a vague term that should never be included in a legal document of such importance like a constitution for these United States. And during the ratification debates in 1787 and 1788, there were many others who made that same case. They were generally called anti-federalists who warned about such vague terms. For example, Brutus, here in his 6th paper, this is December of 1787, he predicted, it's like he knew exactly what was going to happen. He predicted how general welfare would be twisted. And it was exactly how Alexander Hamilton twisted it just a few years later. He wrote, I would ask those who reason thus to define what ideas are included under the terms to provide for the common defense and general welfare. Are these terms definite, and will they be understood in the same manner and to apply to the same cases by everyone? Remember how I mentioned earlier in the show, or I cited Hamilton, he said, we're basically using the broadest term we can imagine here. General welfare is meant to be indefinite. And so here's Brutus pointing out, hey, this is what's going to happen. It doesn't even matter how you've described it to us because I know how this is going to play out in practice. He said, no one will pretend they will be definite and apply the same way to everyone. He said, it will then be a matter of opinion what tends to the general welfare, and the Congress will be the only judges in the matter. Now, mind you, Federalists like James Madison in Federalist 41 and others were responding to anti-Federalist critiques who were claiming, oh, this is going to come out to be unlimited power. Congress is going to be the one who determines what's general welfare. They're going to be the judge of their own power. And the Federalists repeatedly, Hamilton kept quiet on this. They repeatedly said, no way. There's no chance. You're stooping to absurdity to try to make this case. And then Hamilton did just that. And then unfortunately, people went along with it. Now, Brutus continued, an indefinite and vague term like general welfare, like Thomas Jefferson described it some years earlier, Brutus knew that every single faction who had a chance to hold power would twist it to support whatever they want. He said to provide for the general welfare is an abstract proposition which mankind differ in the explanation of, as much as they do on any political or moral proposition that can be proposed. Pretty smart dude, this Brutus. The most opposite measures. This is the fascinating part because this is really what happens. The most opposite measures may be pursued by different parties, and both may profess that they have in view the general welfare. And both sides may be honest in their professions, or both may have sinister views. I think it's mostly the latter these days, but I'm sure there are times where people really believe this is for the general welfare. We have the power to do this. Brutus absolutely called it. Now, in his view, calling that a limit on power is absolutely laughable. He warned that this would end up as no limit on power at all. He said, it is as absurd to say that the power of Congress is limited by these general expressions to provide for the common safety and general welfare, as it would be to say that it would be limited had the Constitution said they should have a power to lay taxes, etc., at will and pleasure. Now, if you're anything like me, you never learned any of this stuff in the government-run and government-approved so-called education system because they never teach any of this stuff. And that's a huge part of the reason why we work so hard every single day here at the 10th Amendment Center to reach and teach more and more people about this forgotten history, about these essential foundational principles from the founders and the old revolutionaries, because the only way forward is to set a foundation where people have some education that isn't provided by the government. We're doing our part, and we appreciate you doing your part to help us spread the word. And honestly, nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. So if you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And if you don't want to become a member but still want to help us out, that's super cool. I still love it. I'm very grateful for your support. And if you already are a member, first of all, thank you. But if you want to pitch in additionally, I just want to make sure you are aware of where you can do that. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Of course, there's a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering the algorithms of the platforms you may watch or listen on. Just interact with them as much as possible. The more that you watch or listen, the more that they think you enjoy it. So if you watch a video that's 20 minutes, you watch it for 20 minutes, it's 100%. But if you watch it for 40, that's 200% and much better. Of course, hitting the like button, leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, comments wherever you can, subscribe, get notifications, sharing links, etc. All that helps out a great deal. I'm very grateful for your support, whether it's financial, otherwise, or a combination of all the above. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was entertaining. But more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week here on the Path to Liberty.